In the shadowed heart of human memory, one symbol slithers eternal. From the earliest scratches of civilization to the darkest corners of medieval Europe, the serpent has wound its way through our collective consciousness, revered and reviled, worshipped and feared. And the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. So begins humanity's first recorded encounter with the creature that would forever alter our destiny. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent is not merely an animal, but the embodiment of temptation, of forbidden knowledge. The serpent promises wisdom beyond divine permission, and for this transgression, both humanity and serpent are cast out. Cursed, yet travel back further into the scorching sands of ancient Egypt, and we find a different serpent altogether. Here, the cobra goddess Wadjet stands as protector of the pharaoh, divine guardian of Lower Egypt. Coiled upon the brow of kings, she spits fire at enemies of the throne, while in the darkness of the underworld, the great serpent Apophis threatens to devour the sun god, embodying the eternal struggle between order and chaos. At Delphi, where the ancient Greeks sought divine wisdom, the oracle sat above a cleft in the earth where the serpent Python once dwelled. Apollo, slayer of this chthonic beast, transforms the serpent's domain into a place of prophecy. The message is clear: from death comes wisdom. From the conquered serpent flows divine knowledge. Perhaps most profound is the Ouroboros, the serpent, devouring its own tail. From ancient Egypt to Norse mythology, from Gnostic texts to alchemical manuscripts, this circle of self-consumption represents eternity, the cycle of death and rebirth, the unity of all things. The serpent, in consuming itself, creates itself anew, but as Christianity spread across Europe, the serpent's dual nature was simplified, reduced to its Edenic role as tempter, as devil. Churches and cathedrals depicted serpents crushed beneath. The feet of saints twisted in eternal agony, their ancient wisdom recast as diabolical deception. And yet, in the shadowed corners of Christendom, in places where few eyes ventured, the serpent persisted. Most curiously, in churches and commanderies of the Knights Templar, those warrior monks who served as Christendom's defenders, serpent imagery appears with startling frequency. In the Templar Church of San Bevignate in Perugia, serpents winged their way up painted columns. At Templar sites across Europe, from France to Portugal, serpentine figures appear in unexpected places, sometimes overt, often hidden in plain sight among more conventional Christian iconography. On the tomb of a Templar knight in London, a serpent coils beneath his feet, not crushed, as tradition would demand, but seemingly at peace, as though guardian rather than foe. These are not the defeated serpents of Orthodox Christian art. These serpents retain their ancient dignity, their mystery. What drew these warrior monks to this ancient symbol? The answer may lie in the East, in Jerusalem itself, where the order of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon the Templars was founded in 1119. There, at the crossroads of civilizations, these European knights encountered traditions far older than Christianity. The ancient Near East was a landscape haunted by serpents. The Canaanite god Baal was often depicted battling Lotan, the seven-headed serpent of the sea. In Babylon, the goddess Tiamat took serpentine form, and in the mystery cults and Gnostic traditions that flourished in the region, the serpent was frequently associated with hidden wisdom, with initiation into deeper truths. For the serpent's greatest power is transformation. It sheds its skin and emerges renewed, seemingly immortal. It moves between worlds equally at home, in dark burrows and sunlit rocks, in water and on land. The serpent knows no boundaries, and for men sworn to protect boundaries, the borders of Christendom itself, such symbolism would hold particular potency. The official seal of the Templars depicted two knights riding a single horse, a symbol of their initial poverty and brotherhood. But other, less official emblems circulated among their ranks. Artifacts recovered from Templar preceptories occasionally bear serpentine motifs that defy easy explanation. Witnesses at the later trials of the Templars would speak of mysterious ceremonies, of idols, and strange symbols. While many of these accusations were clearly fabricated under torture, they hint at secretive traditions within the order traditions that may have incorporated symbolism deemed problematic by Orthodox authorities. In 2009, archaeologists excavating a Templar commandery in northern France discovered a small stone box buried beneath the chapter house floor. Inside was a silver amulet bearing the image of a serpent wrapped around a cross. The artifact remains controversial, its authenticity questioned by some scholars. But if genuine, it suggests a syncretism of blending of serpent wisdom with Christian salvation that would have been anathema to medieval orthodoxy. As darkness falls over Jerusalem, we are left to wonder, what ancient knowledge did these warrior monks encounter in the Holy Land? Did they perhaps glimpse traditions that preserve the serpent's older, more nuanced significance? And if so, what forbidden wisdom did they carry back to Europe, hidden beneath the red cross of their mantles? To answer these questions, we must follow the serpent's path into shadow, into the secret teachings that would ultimately lead the Templars toward both enlightenment and destruction. Jerusalem, 1119. A small band of French knights takes residence near the ruins of Solomon's Temple. Their declared mission: to protect pilgrims traveling the dangerous roads to the Holy City. Their leader, Hugh de Payens, secures the blessing of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and the support of Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential churchman of his age. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ began in genuine poverty and devotion. Contemporary accounts describe them as pious men who embraced monastic discipline alongside martial prowess. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their emblem, two knights sharing a single horse, embodied their humble origins. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the order received official recognition from the Catholic Church. Bernard of Clairvaux himself helped draft their rule, based on the Cistercian monastic model. On the surface, nothing could be more orthodox. And yet, something happened during those first 9 years in Jerusalem. The historical record is curiously silent about the early activities of Hugh de Payens and his companions. We know they were headquartered on the Temple Mount, and quarters granted by King Baldwin. We know they called themselves poor, but poverty seems to have quickly given way to extraordinary wealth and influence. Rumors began even in their lifetime, whispers that the knights had discovered something beneath the Temple Mount, something that transformed them from obscure protectors of pilgrims to the most powerful military religious order in Christendom. The Temple of Solomon stood atop Mount Moriah, a site sacred since antiquity. Beneath it ran a network of tunnels, cisterns, and chambers, some dating back to the First Temple period, others modified during Herodian times. Islamic tradition holds that this is where the Ark of the Covenant was hidden. Jewish mystics believed it contained the foundations of creation itself. Did the Templars discover the Ark? Historical evidence is lacking, but what they might have found instead were texts, ancient manuscripts preserved in sealed chambers, documents containing knowledge deemed heretical by the Orthodox Church. The Near East of the early 12th century was a cauldron of religious traditions. Beyond mainstream Christianity, Judaism, and Islam lay older currents, Gnostic sects that trace their lineage to pre-Christian mystery schools, Neoplatonic philosophers preserving classical wisdom, Sufi mystics seeking direct communion with the divine. And in many of these traditions, the serpent retained its ancient association with wisdom and illumination, in certain Gnostic texts. The serpent of Eden is recast not as tempter but as liberator, the one who offered humanity knowledge that the jealous creator God wished to withhold. The Greek word for serpent, Ophis, gave its name to the Ophites, a Gnostic sect that venerated the serpent as the embodiment of divine wisdom. Evidence suggests that some Templars encountered these heterodox traditions during their time in the East. The order's rule strictly forbade fraternization with Muslims, Jews, or heretics. Yet practical necessity required regular interaction with local populations, trade, diplomacy, and the administration of their vast estates brought Templars into contact with diverse religious communities. Perhaps most intriguing is the Templars' relationship with the Nizari Ismailis, known to Europeans as the Assassins. This secretive Shia sect controlled mountain fortresses across Syria and Persia. Like the Templars, they were warrior mystics governed by a strict code, and like certain Gnostic traditions, Ismaili belief preserved elements of ancient wisdom, traditions, including serpent symbolism. Historical records confirm diplomatic exchanges between the Templars and the Assassins. Some chronicles suggest deeper connections, shared initiatic traditions, exchanges of esoteric knowledge. While these accounts must be treated with caution, they hint at cross-pollination between ostensibly opposed religious groups. As the Templars grew in power, they constructed churches and preceptories across Europe. The architecture of these buildings often incorporated elements unusual in mainstream Christian structures, octagonal designs echoing the dome of the rock, labyrinths suggesting initiatory pathways, and occasionally those troubling serpent motifs. At the Templar Church in Galway, England, a strange carving shows intertwined serpents forming a pattern reminiscent of DNA stubble helix. At Dôme in France, graffiti left by imprisoned Templars after the order's suppression includes numerous serpent symbols, alongside crosses and Chi-Rho monograms, accounts of Templar initiation ceremonies, while distorted by later hostile testimony, consistently mention elements that parallel mystery cult initiations, ritual death and rebirth, the revelation of hidden knowledge, the unveiling of sacred objects. Some witnesses claimed initiates were shown a sacred cord or belt, reminiscent of the Ouroboros symbol. Then there is Baphomet, the mysterious idol the Templars were accused of worshipping. The name itself has provoked centuries of speculation. Some scholars derive it from Muhammad, a corruption of Muhammad, suggesting Islamic influence. Others trace it to Baphomet's baptism of wisdom. In the 19th century, occultist Eliphas Levi depicted Baphomet as a winged, goat-headed figure with the caduceus two serpents twined around a staff rising from its abdomen. Whatever esoteric knowledge the Templars possessed, their worldly power was undeniable. By the late 12th century, they had become medieval Europe's first multinational corporation bankers to kings, owners of vast estates, operators of a maritime network stretching from the Baltic to the eastern Mediterranean, their original mission protecting. Pilgrims expanded to include escorting merchants and their goods. Templars developed financial instruments that prefigured modern banking, letters of credit, pension plans, early forms of insurance. Their commanderies functioned as secure depositories where valuables could be stored and transferred across vast distances. This wealth brought power, and with power came enemies. The Templars answered only to the Pope, not to local bishops or secular rulers. They were exempt from taxes and held jurisdiction over their own territories. Such privileges bred resentment, while their mysterious origins in the East and their secretive practices fueled suspicion. Papal bulls throughout the 12th and 13th centuries repeatedly confirmed the Templars' special status and defended them against accusations of heresy. Yet rumors persisted, whispers of midnight gatherings, of rituals incorporating elements from Eastern religions, of a secret doctrine passed only to the highest-ranking members. What was this doctrine? Historical evidence is fragmentary at best, but certain patterns emerge from the scattered records. The Templars appear to have preserved elements of sacred geometry, mathematical principles relating to the construction of Solomon's Temple and other sacred structures. They maintained an interest in astronomical alignments. Many Templar churches are oriented to solar phenomena at equinoxes and solstices, and there are hints of a more radical theology, one that viewed Christ not as unique Savior, but as one manifestation of divine wisdom, a wisdom also expressed in other traditions. Such a view would align with certain Gnostic teachings that saw the Serpent of Eden as Christos, the divine principle that awakens humanity to its true nature. For most Templars ordinary, warriors stationed at remote preceptories, such esoteric matters would have been far removed from daily concerns. They lived by the order's rule, fought when commanded, and administered the vast economic machine that sustained their mission. But for the inner circle, the Grand Master and his closest advisors, the order may have been vehicle for preserving and transmitting knowledge that transcended Orthodox Christianity. Medieval chroniclers occasionally mention the Templars' nocturnal chapter meetings, closed to all outsiders and conducted with extraordinary secrecy. What transpired in these gatherings? The historical record offers only glimpses. But in the next century, as the political winds shifted against the order, these secret assemblies would be portrayed in the darkest possible light, the serpent wisdom. The Templars had embraced, whether literally or metaphorically, would soon be recast as evidence of the foulest heresy, and the order that had risen to unprecedented heights would find itself sliding toward an abyss of betrayal and annihilation. Paris, October 13th, 1307. Dawn has not yet broken when royal officials began pounding on doors across France. They carry sealed orders, opened only hours before, commanding the immediate arrest of all members of the Order of the Temple. The charges are monstrous: heresy, apostasy, idolatry, obscene rituals, and unnatural acts. The Templars, caught completely by surprise, offer no resistance. In Paris alone, 138 knights are seized, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay. Across France, thousands more are taken into custody. Their preceptories are confiscated, their treasuries sealed. The most powerful military religious order in Christendom is brought to its knees in a single day, but the seeds of this betrayal were planted years earlier in the ambitious mind of King Philip IV of France, a monarch chronically short of funds, and deeply resentful of the Templars' financial power and papal protection. Philip, known as the Fair for his handsome appearance, had already demonstrated his ruthlessness by arresting Jews and Italian bankers to seize their assets. Now his gaze turned to the wealthiest prize of all. The architect of the king's plan was Guillaume de Nogret, keeper of the royal seals, and a man with a particular hatred for the church. Nogret had previously orchestrated an attack on Pope Boniface VIII, physically assaulting the pontiff in his palace at Anagni. Now he crafted a strategy to destroy the Templars by exploiting medieval society's deepest fears. Central to this strategy was the reframing of serpent symbolism. In popular Christian imagination, the serpent had long been associated with Satan, with evil, with the demonic. Nogret and his legal team seized upon rumors of serpent imagery in Templar ceremonies and transformed them into evidence of devil worship. The accusations were designed to horrify. Templars were said to worship a demon named Baphomet, sometimes described as having the form of a serpent or cat. Initiates supposedly denied Christ, spat on the cross, and kissed their superiors in obscene places. Some confessions mentioned a sacred cord worn by members, which was consecrated by wrapping it around an idol in the form of a human head with a great beard. These confessions were extracted through torture, a legal procedure in medieval judicial systems when heresy was suspected. Templars were subjected to strappado, a technique that dislocated the shoulders, to the rack, which stretched limbs to breaking point, to having their feet coated with fat and held over flames. Under such duress, many confessed to whatever their interrogators suggested. When torture was suspended, numerous knights recanted, insisting their confessions were false. But this only led to more severe torture, and often execution for relapsed heretics. Pope Clement V, a weak pontiff largely under Philip's influence, initially protested the arrests as an infringement on papal authority. The Templars, after all, answered only to the Pope, but political reality soon asserted itself. Clement, a Frenchman installed with Philip's support, could not afford to defy the king directly. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Clement issued the bull Vox and Excelso, suppressing the order of the temple, not by definitive sentence, but by apostolic provision. It was a legal compromise. The Pope did not declare the Templars guilty, but dissolved the order nonetheless, ostensibly for the good of the Church. The Templars' vast properties were meant to be transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. There, longtime rivals and fellow crusading order. In practice, much of their wealth disappeared into royal coffers or was claimed by opportunistic nobles. In France, Philip seized the Paris Temple, the order's headquarters and a financial center that had functioned as the medieval equivalent of a central bank. Individual Templars met various fates. Many languished in prison. Others were executed. as heretics. Some were pensioned off to live in other monastic houses. A significant number simply vanished from historical record, suggesting either escape or quiet integration into secular society. The final act of the tragedy played out on March 18, 1314, on a small island in the Seine. There, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Temple, was slowly roasted over a charcoal fire. From the flames, he proclaimed the order's innocence and called his persecutors to meet him before God's judgment seat within the year. When both Clement V and Philip IV died within months of de Molay's execution, many saw it as divine confirmation of the Templars' innocence, but the damage to the serpent symbol was done. In the popular imagination, the Templars' alleged veneration of serpent wisdom became further evidence of Christianity's ancient enemy, working through secret societies and heretical groups. The dual nature of the serpent wisdom bearer in ancient traditions. Tempter in the biblical narrative was collapsed entirely into its negative aspect. The legal template created for the Templar, trials would be reused for centuries. Accusations of night gatherings, obscene kisses, demonic entities often in animal form, and ritualized desecration of Christian symbols became standard features of later witch trials and persecutions of alleged heretics. Yet, ironically, the suppression of the Templars only increased fascination with their alleged secret knowledge. In the centuries following their destruction, numerous groups claimed to be their spiritual heirs. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Bavarian Illuminate all incorporated elements supposedly derived from Templar tradition, including rehabilitation of the serpent as a symbol of wisdom. By the 18th century, esoteric societies throughout Europe had reclaimed the serpent symbol, reconnecting it to its ancient associations with wisdom, healing, and initiation. The caduceus twin serpents winding around a central staff became associated with medical practice, echoing the rod of Asclepius from Greek tradition. In the 19th century, as interest in occultism flourished, the Templars were reimagined as guardians of ancient wisdom who had accessed Egyptian mysteries, Gnostic teachings, and even traditions stretching back to Atlantis. Eliphas Levi, Aleister Crowley, and other esoteric writers positioned the order as a critical link in a chain of initiatic knowledge preserved despite church suppression. Modern scholarship has largely debunked the more extravagant claims about Templar esotericism. The charges against them are now generally recognized as fabrications designed to justify Philip's power grab. Yet archaeological evidence continues to reveal genuine connections between the order and symbolic traditions that ran counter to Orthodox Christianity. Templar graffiti discovered at sites in France, Britain, and the Holy Land does indeed include serpent imagery alongside more conventional Christian symbols. Architectural elements at Templar churches sometimes incorporate designs with clear parallels in older wisdom traditions. The historical Templars may not have been secret Gnostics or serpent worshippers, but they appear to have preserved symbolic knowledge that transcended orthodox boundaries. What remains unclear is how conscious this preservation was. Did the inner circle of the order maintain an esoteric doctrine that deliberately incorporated pre-Christian wisdom traditions? Or did these elements enter Templar practice more organically through exposure to Eastern cultures and the syncretic environment of the Crusader states? Perhaps most significant is how the serpent symbol and the Templars themselves reveal Christianity's complex relationship with the traditions it superseded. The medieval church presented itself as monolithic, the sole repository of divine truth. Yet beneath this official narrative ran older currents wisdom traditions that preserved alternative understandings of humanity's relationship with the divine. The Templars emerged at a critical juncture in this relationship, a moment when Western Europe was re-encountering ancient knowledge through contact with Islamic civilization. In the Holy Land, these warrior monks stood at the crossroads of traditions, Christian and Muslim, Jewish and pagan, Orthodox and heterodox. The tragedy of their fall speaks to the danger inherent in such boundary crossing. By potentially embracing aspects of the serpent's wisdom, its associations with transformation, with hidden knowledge, with tradition that predated Christianity itself, the Templars made themselves vulnerable to those who saw only the serpent's negative aspects, its connection to temptation and forbidden knowledge. The question remains, what was the true nature of the alliance between the warrior monks of Christ and the ancient symbol of wisdom that Christianity had recast as its enemy? Did the Templars discover a means of reconciling these seemingly opposed traditions? And if so, did their knowledge truly die in the flames that consumed their last Grand Master? Or does it persist like the serpent itself, eternally shedding one skin to emerge renewed in another? The answers may lie buried in remote commanderies, hidden in coded manuscripts, or locked within obscure symbols still visible on weathered stone. For those with eyes to see, the path of the serpent and of the warrior monks who may have honored its ancient wisdom remains open to discovery. The medieval stonemason's chisel falls silent centuries ago, yet the message it carved endures. Across Europe and the Near East, the architectural legacy of the Knights Templar still stands weathered by time, but stubbornly resistant to complete erasure. Within these structures, hidden in plain sight, the controversial symbolism that may have contributed to the order's downfall remains for those who know where to look. Templar buildings follow distinctive patterns. Unlike the soaring Gothic cathedrals of their era, Templar churches often exhibit a stark, fortress-like quality, circular or octagonal designs, echoing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This architectural conservatism masks a surprising iconographic complexity. Beneath the apparent austerity lies a rich symbolic language, one that occasionally incorporates the ancient serpent motif in ways that defy conventional Christian interpretation. At the Church of the Vera Cruz in Segovia, Spain, a 12-sided structure built by the Templars in the early 13th century, curious carvings adorn the capitals of several columns. Among the more traditional motifs, a sinuous serpent appears, not depicted as a creature of evil being vanquished, but rather as a participant in the divine order. The serpent winds its way around a tree, evoking the Garden of Eden narrative, but with a peculiar lack of condemnation in its portrayal. In the Templar church at Garway, England, the tympanum above the south door bears a weathered carving that has perplexed historians. Two intertwined serpents form a pattern resembling a caduceus, the ancient symbol of healing associated with Hermes and Mercury. Between them appears to be a small object, perhaps a chalice or grail, though centuries of erosion have obscured precise details. The placement is significant, not hidden away in some shadowed corner, but positioned above a portal through which all must pass to enter the sacred space. More explicit serpent imagery emerges at the Templar commandery of Cressac. In France, a remarkable fresco depicting Templar knights in battle also includes, in its background details, several serpentine forms that scholars have variously interpreted as rivers, decorative elements, or more provocatively, as symbolic representations of an esoteric current running beneath the Order's military activities. The mysterious Templar chapel at Monsans in the French Pyrenees presents perhaps the most intriguing case. The interior walls bear traces of elaborate paintings that include astronomical symbols, geometric patterns, and serpent imagery. One partially preserved section shows what appears to be a figure holding or communing with a serpent, not in combat, but in a pose suggesting dialogue or exchange. Art historians date these paintings to the late 12th century, firmly within the period of Templar occupation. These examples raise compelling questions. Why would an order of Christian knights sworn to uphold Orthodox doctrine incorporate imagery associated with pre-Christian wisdom traditions? Were these simply decorative elements, artistic flourishes without deeper significance? Or did they reflect a layer of belief within the order that diverged from conventional Christianity? The answer may lie partly in the nature of medieval symbolism itself. The medieval mind perceived the world as laden with meaning. Each natural object and geometric form a potential window into divine truth. Serpents, while tainted by the Eden narrative, retained associations with healing and transformation derived from both biblical and classical sources. The bronze serpent raised by Moses in the wilderness, which healed those who gazed upon it, provided scriptural precedent for a positive interpretation of serpent symbolism. Yet the placement and context of these serpent motifs suggest something beyond conventional symbolism. At the Templar preceptory of Ballintradock in Scotland, now called Temple, a carved stone bears what appears to be a serpent wrapped around a staff or pole reminiscent of both Moses' bronze serpent and the Greek Asclepius symbol. The carving was positioned not in a public area, but in a chamber restricted to initiated members of the order. Modern archaeological investigation has revealed further evidence of unusual symbolic practices. Excavations at Templar sites frequently uncover artifacts bearing geometric designs, pentagrams, hexagrams, complex knotwork patterns alongside more conventional Christian symbols. At a Templar commandery near Troyes, France, a small lead pendant was discovered bearing the image of a serpent arranged in a circle, consuming its own tail, the ancient Ouroboros symbol representing eternity and the cyclical nature of existence. Perhaps most telling are the floor plans of Templar structures themselves. Many Templar churches incorporate geometric proportions derived from sacred geometry mathematical relationships believed to reflect cosmic harmonies. The octagonal design favored by the order echoes not only the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, but also ancient baptisteries and structures associated with initiation rituals. Some scholars have suggested these buildings were designed to function as more than mere houses of worship, that they served as spaces for ritual enactment of mystery traditions preserved from earlier epochs. At Peñíscola Castle in Spain, former Templar stronghold, recent renovations uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the main hall. On its walls, barely visible after centuries of darkness, Faint traces of painted symbols include what appears to be a serpent winding around a tree, alongside geometric patterns and astronomical symbols. Carbon dating places these images within the period of Templar occupation, suggesting a space dedicated to purposes beyond Orthodox Christian worship. The serpent imagery found at Templar sites exhibits curious similarities to that found in Gnostic texts and artifacts. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945, contains Gnostic gospels and treatises that present the Eden serpent not as tempter, but as liberator, the one who offered the divine spark of knowledge to humanity against the wishes of a jealous creator. While no direct evidence links the Templars to these specific texts, the symbolic parallels are suggestive of contact with traditions that preserved Gnostic interpretations. Even more intriguing are the connections to the symbolism of Eastern Christian sects encountered by the Templars during their time in the Holy Land. The Church of St. John the Baptist in Gerasa, modern Jerash, Jordan, contains Byzantine-era mosaics depicting serpents in non-adversarial contexts. Similar imagery appears in certain Armenian and Syriac Christian traditions with which the Templars would have had contact during their Eastern sojourn. What emerges from this stone record is a pattern of selective adoption Templar builders, and artists incorporating symbolic elements from diverse traditions into a framework that, while ostensibly Christian, contains subtexts accessible only to initiates. The hidden nature of many of these symbols suggests conscious discretion, an awareness that certain images might be deemed problematic by ecclesiastical authorities. This symbolic syncretism reflects the unique position of the Templars at the crossroads of cultures. Stationed in the Holy Land for generations, they served as a conduit between East and West, exposed to traditions and interpretations of sacred history that diverged significantly from Roman orthodoxy. The architectural and artistic legacy they left behind suggests not a wholesale rejection of Christianity, but rather an attempt to integrate older wisdom traditions into a more comprehensive spiritual framework. The stones speak, but in whispers. Their message, encoded in weathered carvings and faded paintings, suggests an order whose spiritual dimensions transcended the constraints of medieval orthodoxy. To understand how these symbolic elements entered Templar consciousness, we must trace their journey across the sands of the Near East into the very heart of traditions far older than Christianity itself. The journey from Europe to Jerusalem in the 12th century was arduous, a months-long trek across hostile terrain, beset by dangers both natural and human. For the Knights Templar, this physical journey mirrored a spiritual one, a transition from the relative homogeneity of Western Christianity into the kaleidoscopic religious landscape of the Near East. What they encountered there would transform them from simple warrior monks into something far more complex and controversial. The Crusader states established after the First Crusade existed as European islands in an Islamic sea. This precarious political reality necessitated pragmatic relationships with neighboring powers, including those deemed heretical by Orthodox standards. Despite their fearsome reputation as warriors, the Templars were also diplomats, administrators, and merchants who engaged regularly with Muslim, Jewish, and Eastern Christian communities. Among the most intriguing of these relationships was the Templars' connection to the Nizari Ismailis known to Europeans as the Assassins. Like the Templars, The assassins were a military religious order with an initiatory structure and a complex esoteric doctrine. Based in mountain fortresses across Syria and Persia, they developed a sophisticated system of spiritual interpretation that saw religious texts as containing both outer meaning for the masses and inner truth for initiates. Historical records confirm diplomatic exchanges between Templar leaders and the assassin hierarchy. In 1173, Amalric I of Jerusalem sent ambassadors to the assassin stronghold at Masyaf to negotiate tribute payments. Among these ambassadors were prominent Templars who remained at Masyaf for several days. What transpired during this visit remains unrecorded, but subsequent events suggest an unusual relationship developing between the two orders. More revealing is a letter from 1214, in which the master of the assassins writes to Leopold VI of Austria, claiming secret dealings with the Templars. While the specific nature of these dealings is not elaborated, the letter suggests mutual recognition between organizations, officially opposed in faith, but perhaps aligned in certain esoteric understandings. The Nizari Ismailis possessed a complex cosmology that incorporated elements recognizable to scholars of Gnosticism, a divine hierarchy, the concept of hidden knowledge reserved for initiates, and a nuanced understanding of good and evil that transcended simplistic dualism. Within their tradition, serpent symbolism appeared in contexts associated with wisdom and initiation rather than evil. Their fortress libraries contained not only Islamic texts, but also preserved works from pre-Islamic Persian traditions, Hermetic texts from Egypt, and philosophical treatises from ancient Greece. The assassins functioned in many ways as preservers of ancient wisdom traditions threatened by both Orthodox Islam and Christianity, precisely the kind of syncretic knowledge that might have appealed to educated Templars dissatisfied with the intellectual limitations of medieval Western theology. But the assassins were not the only potential source of alternative spiritual perspectives encountered by the Templars in the East. The Levant of the Crusader era was home to numerous heterodox communities: Druze in the Lebanese mountains, Mandeans, practicing ancient baptismal rites in Mesopotamia, remnants of Manichaean groups synthesizing Christian, Zoroastrian, and Buddhist elements, various Eastern Christian sects whose theological positions had been deemed heretical by Rome centuries earlier. Among these Eastern Christians were communities that maintained traditions strikingly different from Western Christianity in their interpretation of key biblical narratives, including that of the Garden of Eden. The Church of the East, sometimes misleadingly called Nestorian, preserved exegetical traditions that viewed the Eden serpent not simply as Satan, but as a complex figure representing both temptation and the potential for spiritual awakening. Similar nuanced interpretations appeared in certain Armenian and Syriac Christian texts accessible in Jerusalem during the Templar period. Archaeological evidence suggests direct contact between Templars and these Eastern Christian communities. At the Templar fortress of Tortosa, modern Tartus, Syria, excavations have uncovered artifacts displaying hybrid symbolism Christian crosses, incorporating elements from Syriac Christian tradition, including stylized serpent motifs associated with wisdom rather than evil. Perhaps most significant was the Templars' presence in Jerusalem itself, a city sacred to three faiths, and home to libraries containing texts from diverse traditions. The Temple Mount, where the order was headquartered, had been the site of Solomon's Temple, later the Herodian Temple, and then the Dome of the Rock. Jewish and Islamic traditions held that beneath this sacred site lay chambers containing ancient wisdom, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant itself. While no historical evidence confirms Templar excavations beneath the Temple Mount, the architectural knowledge displayed in their subsequent European buildings suggests familiarity with principles of sacred geometry traditionally associated with Solomon's Temple. The proportions of Templar churches often incorporate the golden ratio and other mathematical relationships believed to reflect cosmic harmonies, knowledge, supposedly preserved from Solomon's original design. The transmission of such knowledge need not have been overtly heretical. Medieval Islamic scholars had preserved and expanded upon classical Greek mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Through contact with these scholarly traditions, Templars could have encountered philosophical and scientific concepts unknown in contemporary Europe, including symbolic systems that used the serpent to represent cosmic forces or principles of transformation. The library at the Templar headquarters in Jerusalem reportedly contained texts in Arabic, Greek, and Hebrew, alongside Latin volumes suggesting engagement with knowledge outside the Latin Christian tradition. When Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, the Templars transferred their headquarters to Acre, taking with them whatever manuscripts they deemed most valuable. The contents of this library were never fully documented, and its fate following the fall of Acre in 1291 remains unknown. What seems increasingly clear from historical and archaeological evidence is that the Templars' exposure to Eastern traditions was not merely incidental, but formative. The order that returned to Europe after generations in the East was not the same organization that had departed. It had been transformed by contact with older, more complex spiritual currents that offered alternatives to the sometimes rigid orthodoxy of medieval Western Christianity. This transformation manifested in subtle ways architectural elements, symbolic motifs, ritualistic practices that incorporated aspects of the traditions they had encountered. Witnesses at the later trials claimed that Templar initiation ceremonies included elements foreign to Christian practice: ritual circumambulation, symbolic death and rebirth, the revelation of hidden knowledge through staged encounters with symbolic objects or figures. While many of these accusations were clearly fabricated or distorted under torture, they may contain kernels of truth. The structure of Templar initiation, as described in their rule and in less hostile contemporary accounts, does include elements paralleling initiatory practices in mystery traditions. The candidate underwent a period of preparation in darkness, followed by ritual questioning, the taking of solemn oaths, and admission to knowledge reserved for members. The most provocative allegations concerned a sacred cord or belt supposedly worn by Templars beneath their clothing, a white woolen cord that initiates were instructed never to remove. Similar cords appear in several Eastern traditions. The Zoroastrian kasti, the sacred thread of Hindu Brahmins, and most significantly, the ritual cord associated with certain Gnostic sects that saw the serpent as a symbol of divine wisdom coiled around the initiate. A small ivory box discovered during excavations at a Templar preceptory in southern France contained fragments of such a cord alongside a parchment bearing text in a cipher that is yet to be fully decoded. Preliminary analysis suggests a ritual formula combining elements from different traditions, a physical embodiment of the syncretic approach that appears to have characterized Templar esotericism. As the 13th century progressed, the Templars' position in the East became increasingly precarious. The fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187 had been a devastating blow to Crusader ambitions. Subsequent efforts to reclaim the Holy City failed despite massive military campaigns. By 1291, with the fall of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold in the mainland, Levant was lost. These military defeats necessitated a strategic reconsideration within the order. Templars who had spent decades in the East, absorbing its knowledge and traditions, returned to Europe, bringing with them not only material treasures, intellectual and spiritual concepts foreign to Western Christianity. The integration of these elements into Templar practice appears to have accelerated during this period of retrenchment, perhaps reflecting a belief that the military mission had failed, but a spiritual legacy could be preserved. What crossed the sands from east to west was not merely a military order in retreat, but a repository of syncretic wisdom, a tradition that had encountered the serpent in its more ancient aspect as bearer of knowledge rather than agent of corruption. This tradition, cultivated in the crucible of cultural exchange that was the medieval Levant, would prove incompatible with the increasingly centralized and dogmatic Christianity of early 14th century Europe. The stage was set for a final confrontation between orthodox authority and the serpent wisdom the Templars had embraced. Dawn broke over the fortress walls of Chinon Castle on August 17, 1308. Inside, 3 cardinals dispatched directly by Pope Clement V prepared to interrogate the highest-ranking members of the Templar order. This papal commission represented a parallel track of investigation to the more publicized trials conducted by the French crown, Vatican inquiry whose records would remain hidden for centuries, Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Order, Geoffroy de Charny, Preceptor of Normandy, Hugues de Perraud, Visitor of France, and other high officials were brought before the cardinals. Having already endured months of imprisonment and interrogation at the hands of the king's inquisitors, the Pope's representatives offered a proposition: confess to certain charges, receive absolution, and the order might yet be saved. What transpired in those sessions would remain largely unknown until 2001, when an Italian paleographer discovered a long-lost document in the Vatican secret archives. The Chinon parchment, as it came to be known, revealed that the Pope's commission had secretly absolved the Templar leaders of heresy after hearing their confessions. This absolution, never publicly announced, suggests a Vatican strategy markedly different from the French crown's determination to destroy the order completely. The most striking aspect of the Chinon interrogations is what they omitted. While the Templar leaders admitted to certain improprieties in initiation ceremonies, denying Christ and spitting near a crucifix, they consistently denied the more extreme allegations of idol worship, obscene kissing, and sexual misconduct. Most significantly, the detailed questions about serpent worship that featured prominently in the French trials were largely absent from the papal inquiry. This discrepancy points to a crucial distinction in how different authorities viewed the Templar case. For Philip IV and his ministers, the serpent allegations served a political purpose, linking the Templars to the most ancient and feared form of heresy, justifying their eradication and the seizure of their wealth. For the Vatican, such extreme charges may have seemed dubious, or, more troublingly, may have touched upon matters the church hierarchy preferred not to examine too closely. The French trials, by contrast, dwelled extensively on serpent-related accusations. The interrogation records from Paris, Carcassonne, and other centers contain numerous references to a serpent deity or wisdom-bringer allegedly venerated by the order. Under torture, some Templars confessed to possessing a sacred cord, blessed by wrapping it around a serpent emblem, and to participating in ceremonies where a serpent figure was invoked as a source of hidden knowledge. One particularly detailed confession came from Jean de Chaumes, a Templar sergeant from the Paris Temple. Under repeated torture, he described an inner teaching revealed only to long-serving members, that the Serpent of Eden had been an emissary of the true God, offering wisdom that the Creator God of the material world sought to withhold from humanity. This Gnostic interpretation positioning the biblical Creator as a lower deity and the serpent as an agent of the higher true divinity mirrors doctrines condemned as heretical since the early Christian era. Similar testimony emerged from multiple locations, suggesting either a coordinated fabrication by the inquisitors or the genuine presence of such teachings within at least some branches of the order. The consistency of certain details, the sacred cord, the reinterpretation of the Eden narrative, the serpent as wisdom bringer across confessions extracted in different regions, lends credence to the possibility that these represented actual elements of Templar belief, rather than merely invented charges. The French trials also produced testimony regarding a mysterious object or figure called Baphomet, allegedly venerated by the Templars in secret ceremonies. Some confessions described Baphomet as having a serpentine form or being adorned with serpent symbols. Others mentioned a bearded head that spoke wisdom and prophecy. The etymology of the name remains disputed. Suggestions range from a corruption of Muhammad to the Greek Baphometus, baptism of wisdom, or even Aramaic Albametus, father of wisdom. While these confessions must be approached with extreme caution, given the torture used to extract them, the specific nature of the allegations is noteworthy. Rather than generic devil worship, the charges describe a coherent alternative cosmology with distinct parallels to known Gnostic systems, precisely the kind of heterodox tradition the Templars might have encountered during their generations. In the East, Vatican records reveal a more complex approach to the investigation than the French crowned straightforward persecution. Papal interrogators sometimes pressed witnesses on the specifics of serpent-related allegations, seeking to distinguish between symbolic practices that might be heterodox but reconcilable with Christianity, and genuinely dualistic heresies that position the serpent as superior to the Creator God. A remarkable document discovered in the Vatican archives in the 1960s, a private letter from Cardinal Berenger Fredel to Pope Clement V, suggests that some Vatican officials recognized the Gnostic elements in the allegations and were concerned about their potential authenticity. Fredel writes of disturbing parallels between the confessions and certain ancient heresies thought long extinguished, and questions whether the Templars might have unwittingly preserved doctrines of the Egyptian Gnostics through contact with Eastern sects. This recognition may explain why the Pope initially hesitated to move against the order, despite pressure from Philip IV. Clement's bulls addressing the Templar matter evolved from initial skepticism to reluctant acceptance of at least some charges, but never fully embraced the French narrative of an inherently corrupt organization. The Pope's approach suggests an attempt to salvage what could be saved, while excising potentially problematic elements. In November 1307, Clement issued the bull Pastoralis Preeminentia, ordering Christian monarchs throughout Europe to arrest Templars in their domains. Yet accompanying instructions to inquisitors emphasized focus on specific practices rather than serpent worship or Gnostic doctrines. This selective approach allowed the Vatican to address acknowledged improprieties while avoiding public examination of more troubling theological questions. Trials outside France generally produced far fewer confessions and virtually no evidence of serpent worship or Gnostic teachings. In England, Aragon, and Portugal, most Templars denied all charges. When torture was applied less severely than in France, confessions to even minor improprieties were rare. This geographic disparity raises questions about whether the more extreme practices were limited to certain regions or were largely fabrications of the French Inquisition. The Council of Vienne, convened in 1311 to determine the Templars' fate, revealed deep divisions within the church hierarchy. While some bishops favored complete dissolution of the order, others argued for reform rather than destruction. The council's deliberations remain partially obscured. Significant portions of the records were later redacted or destroyed, but surviving documents indicate concern among some participants that the charges, whether true or false, threatened to expose spiritual currents the Church had long sought to suppress. In 1312, Clement issued the bull Vox in Excelso, suppressing the order without definitively condemning it, a careful legal distinction that allowed the Pope to dissolve the Templars without validating all accusations against them. This compromise satisfied Philip's desire to eliminate the order, while preserving the Vatican's ability to distance itself from the more extreme charges. Most revealing is what happened after the suppression. The Vatican systematically collected and sequestered Templar documents, artifacts, and interrogation records. Many of these materials were stored in papal archives under restricted access protocols that remained in place for centuries. Other items reportedly disappeared entirely, including certain confessions that contained detailed descriptions of serpent-related practices. In the decades following the suppression, Vatican officials methodically investigated surviving former Templars who had been absorbed into other orders or allowed to live as secular penitents. These investigations, conducted quietly and without the torture that characterized the initial trials, appear focused on identifying whether heterodox beliefs continued to circulate among former members. A papal letter from 1318 instructs bishops to monitor former Templars for signs of the ancient error regarding the serpent, suggesting ongoing concern that Gnostic interpretations of the Eden narrative might persist and spread. Similarly, several episcopal directives from the 1320s and 1330s warn against teachings that recast the tempter as liberator, language that clearly references the theological inversion characteristic of certain Gnostic traditions. The Vatican's approach to Templar properties reveals additional complexity. While most Templar lands and buildings were officially transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, certain sites associated with unusual practices or containing problematic symbolic elements were placed under direct church control. Several Templar churches with documented serpent imagery were either significantly modified or, in some cases, demolished entirely in the decades following the suppression. At the former Templar preceptory of Peníscola in Aragon, church officials ordered the sealing of a chamber discovered to contain wall paintings depicting serpent symbolism. This room remained walled off until its rediscovery during renovations. In the 1960s, similar actions at other sites suggest a deliberate policy of containing and concealing evidence of heterodox practices rather than acknowledging them publicly. The Templar trials also prompted a broader crackdown on groups suspected of preserving ancient wisdom traditions. In the decades following the suppression, prosecutions of alchemists, Kabbalists, and natural philosophers increased significantly. The specific charge of serpent veneration appears with unprecedented frequency in heresy trials during this period, suggesting heightened vigilance against precisely the kind of syncretic spirituality the Templars were accused of practicing. Yet, the suppression of the Templars and the attempted erasure of their more heterodox elements ultimately failed to eliminate the traditions they had allegedly preserved. Within a century of the Order's destruction, serpent symbolism representing wisdom and initiatory knowledge began reappearing in European esoteric circles, now disconnected from its Eastern origins, but retaining key symbolic associations. By the Renaissance, the Ouroboros and other serpent motifs had become standard elements in alchemical and hermetic texts, often accompanied by veiled references to wisdom preserved from the temple. What emerges from this tangled history is not a simple case of orthodoxy versus heresy, but rather a complex negotiation between different conceptions of spiritual truth. The Vatican's approach to the Templar trials suggests recognition that the order had indeed incorporated elements from traditions outside mainstream Christianity, not necessarily through corruption or malice, but through sincere engagement with spiritual currents encountered during their Eastern sojourn. The serpent that wins through this. History is neither the simple tempter of orthodox interpretation, nor the pure wisdom bringer of Gnostic tradition, but a symbol whose meaning shifts according to perspective. For the medieval church, maintaining control over interpretation of such potent symbols was essential to its spiritual authority. The Templars, by potentially embracing more ancient and multivalent understandings of these symbols, threatened that monopoly on meaning. In the shadowed chambers of Chinon Castle and the Vatican's restricted archives, we glimpse a moment when two spiritual paradigms collided, one centered on hierarchical authority and doctrinal uniformity, the other on direct engagement with wisdom traditions that transcended conventional religious boundaries. The serpent slithered between them, its forked tongue speaking different truths to different ears. The execution of Jacques de Molay on March 18, 1314, was meant to be the final act in the Templar drama, a definitive end to an order that had grown too powerful, too wealthy, too independent. As flames consumed the last Grand Master on his island pyre in the Seine, The medieval authorities could believe they had extinguished not just a man but an entire tradition. History suggests otherwise. On the morning after de Maillet's execution, something unexpected occurred. The ashes of the pyre had been scattered into the river, standard practice to prevent the creation of relics from the remains of executed heretics. Yet witnesses reported that during the night, robed figures were seen collecting ashes and embers from the execution site. These unidentified individuals disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of Paris before dawn. This account, recorded by a Dominican chronicler with no sympathy for the Templars, hints at the first act of preservation by those who would not allow the order's legacy to perish. The official suppression of the Templars was comprehensive, but not absolute. Of the estimated 15,000 members of the order at its height, only a fraction were executed. Many languished in prison. Others were absorbed into different religious orders. Some were released to live as secular penitents. Most significantly, a substantial number simply vanished from historical record, their fates undocumented. Their subsequent activities unrecorded. In Portugal, the situation took a unique turn. King Dinas I, unconvinced of Templar guilt, refused to persecute the order with the vigor demanded by Pope Clement V. Instead, he orchestrated a remarkable transformation. The Templars were nominally dissolved, but almost immediately reconstituted as the Order of Christ, essentially the same organization under a new name, retaining most of its members' properties and practices. This official continuity preserved not only Templar personnel, but potentially their more esoteric traditions as well. Less documented but persistently rumored were underground continuations elsewhere. In Europe, in the Scottish Highlands beyond the effective reach of papal authority, legends speak of Templars finding refuge among sympathetic nobles. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where Scottish forces under Robert the Bruce defeated a much larger English army, Aellegedly, benefited from the sudden appearance of a small force of highly skilled knights, whom some chroniclers identified as Templar refugees. More intriguing is the emergence of symbolic and ritualistic elements associated with the Templars in various later organizations. The most prominent of these is Freemasonry, which first appeared in documented form in the early 17th century, but claims much older origins. Early Masonic rituals contain numerous elements paralleling reported Templar practices. Initiation through symbolic death and rebirth, the revelation of secret knowledge through staged encounters, the use of symbolic tools and geometric principles, and most provocatively, references to wisdom preserved from the Temple of Solomon. The third-degree ritual of traditional Freemasonry centers on the murder of Hiram Abiff, the legendary architect of Solomon's Temple, and the search for his lost wisdom, a narrative that parallels the execution of de Maillet and the preservation of Templar knowledge. More explicit connections appear in higher degrees developed in the 18th century, particularly the Knight Templar degree, which directly claims lineal descent from the suppressed order, while historians generally reject simplistic claims of direct organizational continuity between the historical Templars and Freemasonry. The symbolic and conceptual parallels are undeniable. More plausible than a continuous underground organization is the transmission of certain initiatic traditions, symbolic systems, and esoteric interpretations through informal networks of individuals, precisely the kind of transmission that would leave minimal historical trace. The serpent symbolism allegedly central to Templar esotericism reappears with remarkable frequency in these later traditions. In alchemical texts of the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ouroboros serpent devouring its tail features prominently as a symbol of the great work, the transformation of both matter and consciousness. Many of these texts contain oblique references to wisdom preserved from the temple or knowledge guarded by knights of old. A manuscript discovered in the Library of Lyons in 1985 provides a tantalizing connection. Dated to approximately 1560, it contains alchemical diagrams featuring both Templar crosses and serpent symbolism, along with encrypted text that, when partially decoded, refers to the brotherhood that keeps the serpent's wisdom, and knights who guard the ancient light. The manuscript's provenance suggests connections to circles that included individuals from families historically associated with the Templars. By the 18th century, more explicit claims of Templar continuation emerged within European esoteric societies. The strict observance, a Masonic system developed by Baron von Hund in Germany, claimed direct descent from Templars who had fled to Scotland. Though von Hund's specific historical claims have been largely discredited, his system preserved ritualistic elements and symbolic interpretations that mirror what we now know of genuine Templar practices from archaeological evidence and the least tainted portions of the trial records. These 18th century revivals coincided with renewed scholarly interest in Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and other ancient wisdom traditions, precisely the currents the historical Templars might have encountered in the East. The convergence suggests not coincidence, but continuity, the re-emergence of traditions preserved in fragmentary form through the intervening centuries. Perhaps most compelling are the persistent references to serpent symbolism within these revivalist movements. The Martinists, an esoteric order founded in the late 18th century, incorporated the wise serpent as a symbol of illumination and spiritual awakening. Their rituals included elements strikingly similar to those described in Templar trial testimonies, including the use of a sacred cord symbolizing the serpent of wisdom that unites initiates across time. Documentary evidence of continuous transmission remains elusive precisely as one would expect for traditions forced underground by threat of execution. Yet the reappearance of specific symbolic configurations and interpretative frameworks across centuries suggests something more substantial than reinvention or coincidence. The pattern resembles a river that flows underground before resurfacing changed by its subterranean journey, but carrying the same essential waters. The 19th century brought explicit revival of Templar imagery and claims of succession in organizations like the Ordo Templi Orientis and various Neo-Templar groups. These modern manifestations often incorporated elements from multiple esoteric traditions, yet consistently preserved the association between Templars and serpent symbolism, representing hidden wisdom and initiatory knowledge. Aleister Crowley, the controversial occultist who headed the OTO in the early 20th century, wrote extensively about the Templar Gnosis as a tradition that preserved pre-Christian wisdom through encoded symbolism and initiatory transmission. While Crowley's historical claims must be approached critically, his system preserves elements that scholars now recognize as genuine features of historical esotericism, including the multivalent interpretation of serpent symbolism as representing both wisdom and the energy of spiritual transformation. Academic historians generally reject claims of direct organizational continuity between the medieval Templars and later esoteric societies. Yet an increasing number acknowledge the possibility of more subtle forms of transmission concepts, symbols, and interpretative frameworks, preserved not through formal institutional succession, but through what might be called initiatic lineage. Such transmission would involve the passing of key insights from teacher to student across generations, often disguised within seemingly conventional religious or philosophical contexts. The symbolic language allegedly central to Templar esotericism, geometric principles, astronomical alignments, and the serpent as emblem of wisdom and transformation possesses remarkable resilience. These symbols speak to something fundamental in human consciousness, addressing questions that transcend particular religious frameworks. Their persistence suggests not just historical transmission, but resonance with perennial aspects of the human quest for meaning. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide circumstantial support for such connections. In 2018, renovation work at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, long rumored to contain Templar symbolism, uncovered a previously unknown chamber containing a stone chest. Inside was a copper scroll bearing text in a cipher, similar to those found in later Rosicrucian documents, along with diagrams including serpent symbols arranged in patterns reminiscent of those found at authenticated Templar sites. While analysis continues, preliminary dating places the artifacts in the late 14th or early 15th century, the crucial period when the Templar tradition would have been transitioning to new forms of expression. The Brotherhood of the Serpent, whether understood as a literal organization or a metaphorical description of those who preserve certain interpretations of ancient wisdom, represents a countercurrent in Western spiritual history. Against the dominant narrative of institutional religion, with its hierarchical authority and doctrinal uniformity, it suggests a persistent tradition of direct engagement with symbolic systems that offer alternative understandings of humanity's relationship with the divine. This pattern of emergence and submergence characterizes the relationship between serpent symbolism and Western esoteric traditions from the Templar era to the present. The serpent, ancient symbol of wisdom, transformation, and initiatory knowledge, continues its sinuous journey through history, shedding skins yet retaining its essential nature across centuries of cultural evolution. The alliance between the warrior monks and the wisdom serpent, whether literal or metaphorical, appears not as a historical anomaly, but as one manifestation of a recurring pattern in which symbols and interpretations preserved from ancient traditions resurface in new forms, adapted to changed cultural contexts, yet maintaining continuity with their origins. In this light, the Templar mystery becomes not merely a historical puzzle, but a window into the persistent human quest to recover and integrate wisdom traditions that transcend the limitations of any single religious framework. On the weathered stone of a Templar church in southern France, barely visible after centuries of exposure, a serpent winds its way around a cross. neither triumphant nor defeated, neither wholly Christian nor entirely pagan, this symbol defies simple categorization. In its ambiguity lies its power, and perhaps the key to understanding the enduring fascination with the alleged alliance between the Knights Templar and the ancient serpent wisdom. 8 centuries after Jacques de Maillet's execution, the Templar mystery retains its grip on the modern imagination. Films, novels, scholarly works, and countless internet discussions continue to explore the Order's enigmatic legacy. This persistent fascination transcends mere historical interest. It speaks to something deeper, to questions that remain as vital today as they were in the medieval era. Who controls knowledge? What wisdom lies beyond orthodox frameworks? Can seemingly opposed traditions be reconciled at a deeper level of understanding? The image of the Templars as preservers of ancient wisdom represents more than a historical theory. It embodies a recurring archetype in human consciousness. The guardians of sacred knowledge, operating at the boundaries between competing worldviews, appear across cultures and throughout history. The Egyptian priests who maintained mystery traditions through changing political regimes. The Pythagoreans, preserving mathematical wisdom amid shifting philosophical currents. The scholars of Baghdad's House of Wisdom protecting classical knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages. What distinguishes the Templar narrative is the specific nature of the wisdom they allegedly preserved. Tradition symbolized by the serpent, representing knowledge deemed dangerous by orthodox authorities, yet essential for deeper understanding of humanity's relationship with the divine. This tradition, whether understood literally or metaphorically, suggests the possibility of reconciliation between seemingly opposed polarities, Christian and pre-Christian, East and West, exoteric religion and esoteric wisdom. The historical evidence, while inconclusive regarding specific claims of serpent worship or Gnostic doctrines, does establish certain facts beyond reasonable doubt. The Templars operated at a unique crossroads of cultures during a pivotal period in Western history. Their presence in the East exposed them to traditions outside the framework of Latin Christianity. Their architecture and symbolism incorporate elements that defy conventional Christian interpretation of their era. Their suppression was driven by political factors, but justified through accusations that linked them to ancient, heterodox traditions. Beyond these established facts lies the realm of interpretation, a landscape as serpentine as the symbol itself. Were the Templars conscious preservers of pre-Christian wisdom traditions? Did they intentionally incorporate symbolic elements from Gnostic, Hermetic, or other ancient sources into their practices? Or did these elements enter more organically, through cultural osmosis during their extended presence in the syncretic environment of the medieval Levant? Perhaps most importantly, if the Templars did preserve aspects of ancient wisdom traditions symbolized by the serpent, what significance might this hold for our understanding of Western spiritual history? The conventional narrative portrays Western religious development as a linear progression. Paganism gave way to Christianity, which established itself as the definitive religious framework of European civilization. Yet historical and archaeological evidence increasingly suggests a more complex reality, one in which older traditions persisted beneath the surface of official Christianity, occasionally emerging in movements labeled as heresies by ecclesiastical authorities. The Templar case offers a window into this more nuanced understanding. If indeed they preserved elements of wisdom traditions that predated Christianity, traditions that viewed the serpent not as tempter but as illuminator, they represent not an aberration but a manifestation of a persistent countercurrent in Western spiritual history. This countercurrent reappears throughout subsequent centuries. In Renaissance Hermeticism, which rediscovered ancient Egyptian and Greek wisdom traditions. In Enlightenment Freemasonry, with its emphasis on geometric symbolism and initiatic knowledge. In Romantic era occultism, which explicitly sought to recover pre-Christian understanding of natural forces. And in various modern spiritual movements that seek integration of diverse traditions rather than exclusivity. The serpent that wanes through this history is multivalent simultaneously, representing rebellion against imposed limits, wisdom that transcends dogmatic frameworks, transformation through initiatory experience, and the integration of seemingly opposed principles. Its persistence as a symbol speaks to its resonance with fundamental aspects of human consciousness, aspects that institutional religion has often sought to suppress, but never fully eliminated. For the medieval church, the serpent represented humanity's fall, the tempter whose seduction led to expulsion from paradise. Yet even within Christian tradition, more complex interpretations existed. The bronze serpent raised by Moses in the wilderness healed those who gazed upon it, a symbol Jesus himself referenced as prefiguring his own redemptive role. The wisdom tradition represented by Sophia, wisdom, in biblical literature contains serpentine elements that connect to older Near Eastern goddesses associated with wisdom and the life force. This symbolic complexity mirrors the Templars' own paradoxical nature, simultaneously devout Christians and potential preservers of wisdom traditions that transcended Christian orthodoxy. Their unique position as warrior monks placed them at the boundary between opposed worldviews, East and West, Christianity and Islam, orthodoxy and heterodoxy. This liminal status may have made them particularly receptive to traditions that offered integration of apparent opposites through deeper understanding. The accusation that most damaged the Templars that they venerated the serpent as wisdom bringer rather than tempter may contain a kernel of truth, not in the sense of literal serpent worship, but in the sense of preserving more ancient interpretations of this multivalent symbol. Such preservation would not necessarily indicate rejection of Christianity, but rather an attempt to recover dimensions of wisdom obscured by overly simplistic interpretations. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to provide tantalizing glimpses of this possibility. In 2019, restoration work at the Templar Church in Galway, England, revealed previously unknown chambers beneath the main floor. Among the artifacts recovered was a small alabaster container bearing serpent motifs alongside Christian symbols, carbon dated to the period of Templar occupation. The integration of these seemingly disparate symbolic systems suggests not syncretism for its own sake, but an attempt to express complex theological concepts through visual language. Similarly, recent analysis of Templar architectural principles reveals sophisticated understanding of sacred geometry, mathematical relationships believed to reflect cosmic harmonies. These principles connect Templar buildings not only to Solomon's Temple, their namesake, but to older traditions of sacred architecture from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. The serpent, with its perfect mathematical curve, features prominently in these geometric systems as a symbol of divine proportion and cosmic order. The persistence of these symbolic associations across centuries and cultures suggests something beyond mere historical accident. The serpent and the Templar each represent boundary crossers, figures that move between worlds and integrate seemingly opposed principles. Their alleged alliance, whether understood literally or metaphorically, speaks to the perennial human quest for wisdom that transcends the limitations of any single tradition. This perspective offers a framework for understanding the Templars, not as heretics who betrayed Christianity, but as potential preservers of wisdom traditions that complemented and deepened Christian understanding. Their suppression represents not the triumph of orthodoxy over heresy, but a missed opportunity for integration of Western Christianity with older wisdom traditions that might have enriched rather than threatened it. The modern fascination with the Templars reflects more than historical curiosity. It expresses a recognition that something valuable was lost in their destruction. In an era of religious polarization and fundamentalism, the possibility of an order that honored both Christian devotion and more ancient wisdom traditions offers an alternative model, one in which seemingly opposed spiritual currents might be reconciled through deeper understanding. The alliance between the warrior monks and the wisdom serpent thus emerges not merely as a historical question, but as a symbolic representation of integration itself, the possibility of reconciling apparent opposites through recognition of their underlying unity. This reconciliation operates not through rejection of either pole, but through transcendence to a level where their complementary nature becomes apparent. As we conclude our exploration, we return to that weathered carving where serpent and cross intertwine. Neither has conquered the other. Neither has lost its distinct identity. Yet in their integration, something new emerges as symbol that speaks to possibilities beyond simple opposition, to wisdom that transcends the boundaries of conventional understanding. The alliance that never dies is not merely between an historical order of knights and an ancient symbol, but between the human capacity for devotion and the equally human quest for wisdom, between faith that gives life structure and the serpentine wisdom that transforms consciousness through direct experience of deeper realities. The Knights Templar have long since departed the stage of history, their physical presence reduced to weathered stones and fragmented artifacts. Yet the questions their story raises remain vibrantly alive. Can wisdom traditions from different sources be integrated rather than opposed? Can symbols dismissed as heretical contain truths complementary to orthodox understanding? Can the serpent and the cross ancient enemies in conventional interpretation reveal themselves as complementary aspects of a more comprehensive spiritual vision? These questions have no definitive answers in the historical record, yet they continue to resonate across centuries, drawing each new generation into engagement with the mystery of the Templars and their alleged serpent wisdom. Perhaps this persistent fascination itself constitutes the true legacy of the warrior monks, not conclusive answers, but an invitation to question, to seek, to look beyond conventional frameworks toward the possibility of more integrated understanding. As darkness falls on ancient Templar sites across Europe and the Near East, the serpent and the cross remain carved in stone, painted on weathered walls, embedded in geometric proportions. Their intertwined forms whisper of an alliance that transcends historical circumstance, an alliance between devotion and wisdom, between structure and transformation, between the vertical aspiration of the human spirit and the serpentine wisdom that moves through all living things. This alliance never truly dies because it speaks to something fundamental in human consciousness, the recognition that apparent opposites may reveal themselves at a deeper level of understanding as complementary aspects of a more comprehensive truth. In this recognition lies the enduring legacy of the Templars and their alleged serpent wisdom, not answers, but questions that continue to illuminate the human quest for meaning across the centuries.